Hey everybody, this is Heidi, and you're listening to the Successful Fashion Designer Podcast. We all know that the fashion industry is brutally competitive and it takes loads of hard work to get ahead. The problem is that everyone's secretive and tight-lipped about their ways. After working as a designer and educator for over a decade, I wanted to help break down those barriers and bring you valuable knowledge from industry experts, and this show is exactly where you'll find that. Whether you're trying to break into the fashion world, make yourself more marketable, launch your own label, or become a successful freelancer, we'll help you get ahead in the cutthroat fashion industry. This is episode 25 of the Successful Fashion Designer Podcast, and today I'm chatting with Trish Concannon, Director of Communications and Public Relations for DG Expo, a low-minimum fabric and trim sourcing trade show. Trish has almost a decade of experience working with startup designers, and in our interview, she shares how to know if you're ready to attend a trade show, what research to do before you go, and the most important thing you must do afterward to make the most of your visit.
It's all about follow-up. It's all about, reaching out to the people you meet, getting business cards, and following through with it.
Before we jump into the interview, I have a quick favor to ask you. Now, if you've listened to other episodes, my favor today is a little bit different. I wanted to first share a review I got from one of the listeners out there. This comes from Love from Austin, Texas. And Love from Austin, Texas says, as a senior fashion merchandising student, I have gained so much from this podcast, more real-world advice for working in fashion than I have ever gotten from my professors. Do yourself a favor and listen to every episode, then listen again and again. Thank you so much, Heidi. Wow, Love from Austin, Texas. I can't tell you how much that review means to me. And the favor I want to ask you guys today is to share this podcast with 3 people you know who work in fashion or who are interested in working in fashion. The more ears we can get on the podcast, the more value we can bring to everybody working in this crazy cutthroat industry. And it would really mean the world to me if you could share the podcast with 3 people. Take 60 seconds and shoot them an email right now with the link to the podcast. Thank you so much. I really, really appreciate it. To access the show notes for today's episode, visit sfdnetwork.com/25. Now on to the interview with Trish. Well, welcome, Trish, to the Successful Fashion Designer Podcast. I would love to have you start by introducing yourself to everybody and telling us who you are and what you do in the fashion industry.
Okay. Hi. Well, thank you, Heidi. My name is Trish Concannon, and I am currently with the DG Expo Fabric and Trim Show, and I am the Director of Communications and Public Relations for the show. Prior to coming on board with DG Expo, I was the Executive Director of a nonprofit organization called Fashion Business Incorporated, and we really were there to provide ongoing business education, consulting, really pretty much helping startup fashion designers through the whole process, educating them on every component of the business of fashion, how to be successful, how to launch a brand. And so basically, in a nutshell, that's my background. And I'm very excited to join in on this podcast today.
Awesome. So this is so great. I mean, you have such a breadth of experience and so many insights into the process of working with startup designers and all the stuff that they go through. Can you, for everyone out there who hasn't heard of DG Expo, can you tell us a little bit about who you guys are and what exactly you do?
Absolutely. So we are a B2B trade show, business to business. We are in 5 cities currently. So it's a fabric and trim sourcing show geared towards sewn product industries, both apparel and home furnishings. We currently are doing the show in San Francisco, Chicago, New York, Miami, and Dallas. New York is our biggest show, which is semi-annually. And we've been growing. So Chicago is a brand new city. We're going to be there the beginning of December 6th and 7th. Basically, our exhibitors are wholesale suppliers. So we have mills, converters, importers, distributors. The thing that we are known for is working with low minimums, which is, I think, made the show so successful because nowadays we have so many independent designers out there, so many startup brands. And when they go to the big sourcing shows like Magic, it can be a little overwhelming, and you're dealing with every country, and a lot of them have huge minimums, and it's really hard when you're trying to do the R&D process and get a product launched to, basically what our exhibitors agree to do is offer low minimums. So we have some great suppliers with different types of product lines and fabrics and eco-friendly, and so it's a really great mix of suppliers. It's a small show. I like to say it's kind of a boutique trade show because, it's really easy to navigate. And on top of the show, we do a seminar series in most of the cities. So educational topics geared mostly towards startups, everything from product development to legal issues and, protecting your brand, intellectual property, all kinds of different topics that will help educate people who are new and just getting started in the industry.
Yeah, and that's so great. It's something, I've been talking to a lot of people on the show who work with startup or indie designers, and the resources that are available to that sector of our industry and community has really grown over the past 5 years. And I think it's become much more attainable to make it on that level for a long list of reasons. And you guys are providing such a great resource. Like you said, some of these other sourcing shows, I've been to Magic. I've also been to your guys' show, and it's night and day in terms of like the ability for me to navigate it and to feel like I can go up and talk to people and just feel a little bit more comfortable in an industry that's so intimidating. So where I'd really love to kind of start, now that we have a really good overview of what you guys are, what you guys do and who you are, is like, let's pretend I'm a startup designer. Like, could you kind of walk me through your advice in terms of like, when would I decide, okay, this is the right time, I'm going to buy my plane ticket, I'm going to come to the show, and like, how can I best prepare to have a successful experience at the show and to walk away from it feeling like I got what I needed out of that investment? So when do you see, like, first question, when do you see designers, when are they ready to sort of, swipe their credit card, buy a plane ticket, and actually physically come to the show?
Well, there's two ways to look at that question and it's a great question. I always would recommend, check out these sourcing shows, even if you just have a concept, because what you really need to know is, you need to kind of get a feel for the industry, what things are going to cost. You might have an idea of a particular product category in mind. One of the most important things is costing your product. And this is one of the biggest mistakes I've seen with startup fashion designers, is not costing their product properly. And in the long run, they're not making any money off of it. So I think going to a show like this, getting an idea, even if you're not ready to take out your credit card, you're not ready to purchase the product, it's a good tool for research, and especially because we do offer the educational seminars for the brand new people. I would say it's never too soon to attend a sourcing show. So you get a feel for it, you take advantage of the courses that we offer, get to know what some of these exhibitors have to offer, what the price structure is, and then after you go back and you're creating your line and you're ready to actually go out there and purchase the fabrics and the trims, then you have a better idea of, what you're going to spend, who you're going to talk to. So really, I don't think it's ever too soon to check out one of these shows.
That's great. That's really great. And I think that it can just be a nice sort of icebreaker into the industry, is just going there, seeing how things work in real life, meeting some people, like you said, going to the seminars, learning a little bit, and getting a good overview of what's out there. Like you said, to reiterate, the costing, how much does it actually cost, and then working backwards to fit that into your product and figure out what you're going to make and the price point. So definitely good advice there. And so when I do come to the show, like, what can I do to be prepared, like in talking to exhibitors? And I think sometimes, the first time you're at a show, I've been to shows for many years, but I remember the first time I went to a trade show, I feel like it can feel really nerve-wracking to walk up to an exhibitor who, let's say, you feel like they know so much, they've been in the industry forever, and I'm on the other side of the table, and I just feel like, oh my God, I have no idea what I'm talking about. How can that conversation start, or what can I do to prepare and to initiate some of those dialogues with those exhibitors so they take me seriously and I can learn and get the information I need out of them?
That's a really great question. What I highly recommend to anyone starting to go to a sourcing show is to educate yourself ahead of time. Especially in the area of textiles, you would be amazed at how many people I met through FBI that wanted to start a line, and they were asking where they could, source things and so forth. And you ask them, well, are you doing a woven or a knit? And you'd be amazed at how many people look at you blankly when you ask that question. And it's so basic that, a lot of people, I would say, just really kind of getting to know what is it that you're looking for. Research, educate yourself on a little bit of textiles, and we usually do some type of basic textiles 101 course at the show. We like to do it the day before the show starts, so sometimes you can get that at the show. But I'd say, try to do your homework ahead of time, because you want to know what you're asking for. You want to make sure you're, comparing apples to apples, and when you go in, and you don't want to say, well, this is, basically, I say bring fabric swatches too. If you're doing your research and you know what you're going to produce, and you want to do like a high-end, women's blazer, whatever it may be, if you have fabric swatches of some sort, that helps. If you have a similar product that you're trying to kind of, I don't want to say copy, but, do something along those lines, bring a sample with you. But really just kind of, there's a lot of courses that I did through FBI on this, and we did them in webinar form. And it's funny that you bring this up, because this is something on my agenda that I want to start doing, is in between the DG Expos, providing some type of education through webinars where we can reach people, preparing them to go to sourcing shows, whether it's our show, whether it's Magic, Tex World, any type of sourcing show. I think people really need to educate themselves ahead of time. So there is information out there. And this is kind of on my radar to get some kind of a webinar series going. We haven't done it yet through DG Expo, but I used to do this very frequently through FBI. So, just making sure that you know what you're asking for, knowing the fabric width, knowing your stitches too. What type of thread do you need to use with the type of fabric that you're using? What type of trims are you looking for? Just really kind of having an idea. A lot of people just kind of go in blindly without doing the research on what types of products work well together, So, yeah. I don't know. I hope I answered that okay. But it is a lot of kind of doing a lot of homework ahead of time, so that you look educated and you look like a serious designer and someone that could be, another thing I wanted to add is a lot of these companies, they're willing to work with low minimums because they see the potential in you, and so everyone's got to start somewhere. So it's all about creating relationships too on both sides. You want to make sure that you're creating really good relationships with the suppliers you're working with. So whether it be fabric suppliers, trim suppliers, manufacturers, everything in this industry, in a lot of industries, it's all built on relationships. And, so this is kind of the beginning point of all of that. And if you come in and you know what you're looking for, and you look like you're really a serious designer, and you have a really great potential product, you're going to have people that are excited to work with you, and they're going to work with you on certain areas that most, some companies wouldn't. They might see the potential and see that you know what you're doing and think, this is someone I want to grow with.
Yeah.
So, it's always good to educate yourself before going in and meeting with these suppliers.
Yeah, and I love that, because I think it's so easy, and this can happen on any scale with anything we do in life, where we maybe don't go in prepared. It could be something tiny as going to a networking event, and we build up the courage to go, and then we go and we don't talk to anybody, or we don't get anything out of it because we just weren't prepared, and we leave and we have these regrets of like, oh, I kind of wasted that. Or on a bigger scale, like I'm going to pay to go to this trade show, I'm going to spend money on a plane ticket and a hotel. And then I think it can be very easy to walk away from that with, oh gosh, I wasn't prepared, or I just kind of made a jerk of myself, like talking to these people. And so doing your homework in advance and doing that research and putting in that effort, so you go in and that you can leave the event saying, God, I got a breadth of knowledge. I met all these great people, and I got the resources that I need to kind of move on to the next step, is going to be such a better feeling. So it does take a little legwork up front, but I think that's absolutely essential to having a successful show, because it is really easy to go to one of these things and then walk away feeling like, oh, I just kind of wasted that, or I didn't feel like I got as much as I should have gotten. So great advice on that. And so then when you're at the show, you're going around talking to people. I love the idea of bringing samples. Whether it be fabric swatches or, like you said, even an entire garment of something that is just maybe an inspiration to show, that can speak, a picture or a sample is worth 1,000 words, right? So
absolutely.
Yeah, great way to talk to the vendors and show them what you're working with. At the show, I'm going around and can I expect to collect swatches, or what does that really look like? What am I going to walk away with after the show, and what am I going to be doing next?
There is a potential of walking away with swatches. It just depends on, which vendor you're dealing with. Mm-hmm. And a lot of times they want to make sure that they're handing out swatches that are really people that, could be bringing them future business. They're not going to see a group of students from, one of the design schools coming in and hand out all their sample swatches to them, that type of thing. So it's kind of, I think on that end too, you have some who are a little bit more, wary of just handing out samples to just everyone that walks by. Mm-hmm. But again, if if you stop and you create a conversation with them and know exactly what you're asking for, I think there's definitely, people do walk away with sample swatches from these shows.
Yeah, that's great.
And the follow-up too is really important.
Yeah, talk a little bit about that.
I was going to say follow-up too, make sure you get the business cards of these different vendors. And follow up, and that you don't have to make a purchase in there, but, knowing what you're asking for, you might take all of this information back to your hotel room with you and then kind of sort through it and then, kind of revisit it, even if it's after the fact, after the show when you're doing your follow-up, maybe requesting samples if you didn't get sample swatches from them. There's just like with any trade show, whether you're on the sourcing end or you're exhibiting at a trade show to the retailers, a lot of times people get, I know I've kind of been through that end of it too, where people get really disappointed because they're not getting sales, and it's all about follow-up. It's all about, reaching out to the people you meet, getting business cards, and following through with it.
Yeah, it doesn't end at that in-person meeting over that 3-day trade show. There's definitely a lot that happens after that.
Exactly.
And so you mentioned you might or might not want to buy at the show. So talk a little bit about that, because I think that I to be honest, I don't go to these shows necessarily to buy for myself, but just to source and just see what's out there for my clients. And so is the DG show somewhere where you can go and buy like right on site or place orders, or what does that look like?
Yes, definitely it's an order placing show. The reason I said earlier, maybe, like when you asked if there's a certain point that they should, when they're ready to attend a trade show. Mm-hmm. So some might not be ready to buy yet, but they're doing their research, they're pricing things out. But it is definitely an order writing show, and a lot of our exhibitors will have immediate products or really low yardage if you're doing it for like the sample making process or testing. So that's the great thing about our show that you're not going to find at some of the larger shows when you're dealing with people who have huge minimums. And that's another thing I didn't mention early on, is that all of our exhibitors have an office in North America. So we're only dealing with North American companies.
That's great.
So you won't find, China and Bangladesh and all these other, countries there. However, some of them may get fabrics from these countries, but they are either the distributors or the converters. So you're dealing directly with an office in North America, which kind of helps with the communication barrier that sometimes you go to these big shows like Magic and you might find a really good deal, but then you're having trouble communicating, or they say, yes, they have something. And, a lot of times there's that language barrier where everything is yes and it doesn't mean yes. So that's the nice thing, is that, you're dealing with that's one of the requirements of our show is, actually we're going into the European market as well, but you're only going to find European vendors and North American vendors at our shows.
Oh, that's great. And so not only the language barrier, but also just like turnaround time is huge, not in just email communication. I know I work with a lot of vendors overseas that you have to wait a whole day sometimes between emails, but also just getting the delivery, getting the product, getting your fabrics, your trims to you. They're coming, like you said, even if they may source from overseas vendors, it's all located in the U.S. or in Europe. And so your turnaround time to get the delivery is much faster, I'd imagine.
Absolutely. You are totally correct about that. Yep.
Yeah.
And a lot of times if you're dealing with a country like, Italy, for example, there are times when they'll just take a month off and you don't hear from them at all.
Yeah.
And people are like, where's my fabric? Well, that's just something you need to know. There's certain countries that kind of shut down during their siesta time. So, that's another thing that you're not going to deal with.
Yeah, Chinese New Year is something I'm very used to dealing with. It's essentially everything shuts down for like 2 to 4 weeks. You're not getting anything done. And it's something, if you don't know that can be a big slap in the face when you're like, wait, this is not on track and no one's answering me for a month. So great reminder on that. Yeah. Okay, so I'd love to have you talk a little bit more about like the minimum specifics, because a lot of designers that I talk to, for whatever long list of reasons, want to manufacture overseas or want to source overseas. And that's my expertise. But that's because I've worked with brands that are established and have quantities that warrant that. But for a lot of designers, it makes more sense to start locally, whether that be in the U.S. or wherever they are, to start sourcing locally and to go into production with smaller quantities. But for some reason, some designers just get in their head that they want to do larger production. So talk a little bit about why that can be a smarter direction to go. And then also, what do those numbers actually look like? Because you mentioned really large quantities at Magic versus low minimums at your guys' show at DG Expo. So what does really large versus low minimum really look like? Can we attach some numbers to that?
Well, I mean, it depends from vendor to vendor, but I know most of the people at our show will work with just, if someone needs us to do a test run and get a few yards of a certain fabric, most of them are willing to do that. Whereas if you go, some of the bigger trade shows and you're dealing with companies from overseas, they might say, no, you have to buy 500 yards of this, So, it varies from company to company. So, but I know that with the DG Expo exhibitors, they are very willing to work. I mean, we're known as the low minimum show, so they know that they're getting startups. Now, not to say that everyone that comes into our show is a startup. They do get a lot of the larger companies who come in and they get some really large orders there. But the nice thing is that they are willing to work with the small guys, and if that means I need 5 yards of this, a lot of times they are willing to do that. And back to your comment about, when you're new, is it better to produce your goods and source your goods domestically or overseas? I think a lot of times, it's very difficult for people unless all of a sudden, they're out the gate, they're getting huge orders. It's hard to reach the minimums overseas. Now, I've noticed a lot of contractors in China and other countries are lowering their minimums. Mm-hmm. However, it's the control. It's the speed to market. It's a lot of people don't realize, you have to cost in the shipping and the duties and so forth. So when you're dealing locally, you don't have to worry about that. You could actually, it's a lot cheaper. So say you're in, I don't know, if you're in New York, you're producing in LA, it's a much quicker plane ride, and it's less expensive to come and do a check on your production rather than flying to China.
Yeah.
It's just, and a lot of times you can find something locally. If you're in California, and you might find something, here in Southern California where it's easy to drive to the factory to see what's going on. Unless you have, someone who's got eyes and ears over at the factory, it's having control over your product development, having control over the speed to market. It makes a lot more sense when you're new, not to mention there's a certain cachet with the made in the USA thing too, that a lot of people use that in their branding process. So, I think when you get to a certain point and you are getting larger orders, and it might make sense to move your production, and move it to China or somewhere else, because it might, lower your price, your costing. And, but I think when you're getting started, it just makes it so much easier to have control over your production, having it here locally.
Yeah. And I mean, those minimum numbers are great. I mean, to know that you could go to the show and literally buy a couple yards. I think a lot of people listening, that's going to be like a jaw dropping. What? I can actually do that? It sounds like something that's, if you need to buy a couple yards, you might have to go to a local fabric store and pay retail, but it really does exist. There are a lot of wholesalers out there that will work with you and sell you a few yards, as opposed to, like you said, going to Magic and sourcing 500, which is an insane amount to swallow when you're first starting. And I'll one more note on that. I'll reiterate the duty thing, because I know people who managed to figure out sourcing overseas and then brought their product in and didn't realize there was duty when it came through customs. And duty can be upwards of like 30% plus. So an item that you thought was going to cost you $10 and you just ordered 500 of them now costs you $13. You have to add an extra 30%. So that can be an insane learning curve, and something that can really financially break you if you don't really know what you're doing. So a lot of those hurdles are taken down or lowered when you are manufacturing domestically. So great point on bringing that up. You've been in the industry for a really long time with your experience with FBI and now with DG. And so I'd love for you to talk a little bit about, what you've seen over the years in terms of what startup designers are doing and what's working to go from zero to, launching their collection. Like what have you seen some designers do that's worked really well? It's a very rocky road to go down, and it's full of a lot of hurdles, and it's a tough challenge, but it's definitely doable. And so what advice could you give to designers out there listening to get started and to make it through that whole journey to launch?
Sure. I mean, there's a lot of hurdles to jump through when you're launching a brand in this industry, and there's a lot of competition out there, but we've seen brands succeed. As I said earlier, one of the biggest issues we've seen is the costing, making sure you do not forget anything when you're doing that cost sheet, figuring in a lot of people, they figure the fabrics and the trims, and then they're not figuring the time, the overhead, and so forth. That's one of the big ones. Another thing that I always tell new designers is make sure you have a thick skin and take that constructive criticism well. Most designers are artists, and artists are very attached to their art, their design, whether it's a painting or a piece of fashion, and I've seen this happen on numerous occasions where they'll come in for a consult, and we had a lot of great industry consultants that worked with us at FBI who would, say, well, I think you need to change this and change this if you really, it's something, maybe it's, if you want to sell this is what's selling. We've had sales reps come in and consult with new brands. We tried to get the feedback from all different areas of the industry. And I've seen people get very upset and say, no, I'm not compromising my design. Well, the thing is I understand that when you're creating something, you're very attached to it. But then it becomes a matter of, are you going to hang it in a gallery, or are you going to turn it into a business and make money off of it? So that's the biggest thing is, making sure that, do your research if you don't like to shop, you're probably in the wrong industry, because you have to go out there and see what's selling. Who's your competition? Knowing who you're up against. Everyone has competition of some sort. And so see why is this particular brand selling so well? What are people looking for out there? And, if you go to a trade show and you're showing your brand to the retailers for the first time, and a buyer says, hey, I might buy that dress that, if you put a sleeve on it, or, taking that, again, it's looking at, this is the buyer, this is the retailer who knows what's going to sell in her store. So, if you want to sell the product, you need to make sure that you are not getting offended by these suggestions, but realizing, okay, this person knows who her market is, who she's selling to, what they're going to buy. And if I have to add a sleeve to this particular dress in order to get this order, that type of thing it's really about, it's tough because people get very offended by any kind of constructive criticism towards their design. But I think it's, like I said, it's a matter of, being successful. You kind of have to look at, you're not the one wearing it. You have to look at what's going to sell out there and, taking that constructive criticism well.
Yeah. And that can be like a really fine line, because a lot of people are very happy to give critiques and give feedback and give their advice and their input and their opinion. But I think that it can be a really fine line as a designer to know, okay, that's good advice. I can really take that and make this product better, versus trying to implement every piece of advice you get. You're going to just run yourself in circles into the ground and not make any progress.
That's true. Yeah, absolutely. So
that can be
and you don't want to compromise your product integrity either. If you have a certain quality that you're trying to keep, you want to make sure that you're not, maybe you might get a potential order from, a lower end store who says, if you, produce this with a cheaper fabric and so forth, you kind of have to make these decisions as you go. What is it that you want to be known for? Every famous designer starts out with a particular signature piece that they're known for. So there's a fine line of, you don't want to compromise your brand's integrity, but you also want to make sure that you can turn it into a viable business. And so knowing what advice to take and how to kind of, use that to create a successful brand that's going to sell.
Yeah. So you've been working with startup designers for many, many years now. I won't put a number in your mouth, but it's been quite a while, if I'm not mistaken.
I've been working since 2009. I've been with FBI.
Okay. Okay, so almost 10 years, not 8, 9, 10 years. So I'm curious to know, because I've heard a lot of different perspectives from various people in various aspects of the industry. How have you seen the climate in fashion change as it relates to startup designers?
I would say, it's funny you say as it relates to startups, because there's been a huge shakeup in the industry just in the last couple of years. And a lot of it has to do with, big shift in consumer behavior, the way people are shopping. What we've been seeing is a lot of the traditional large brands have been struggling, have been on the verge of bankruptcy and layoffs. And, it's been very tough. The department store, business is struggling. It's a little scary when you hear these industry reports on what's happening in fashion right now. It's intimidating for a startup brand. But what I tell people is, on the flip side, I think it's these independent designers that are beginning to thrive. If you have a particular product that's unique, I think a lot of, consumers don't want to, in general, you're looking at, if you study the millennials, and this is a huge, they're taking over the market right now. This is a whole new generation of shoppers that want something unique. They don't want to particularly go into a Macy's and buy a blouse off a rack that there's 30 other of the same exact blouse. I think that I'm seeing, a lot of these little independent boutiques that have some type of an experience, not just, it's interesting. They offer different, I don't know, whether it be a workshop or different experience. It's all about the experience of the shopping. Everything's gone online, but I think the boutiques that are doing well are the ones that are offering more than just racks of clothing. Come in and, we're going to do a workshop in this area, or they have some type of other offering within the store. And with that, it's also these really unique independent designers. I see that a lot of them are kind of up and coming and thriving. And I think there's an opportunity, I guess, is what I'm getting at. Things are looking very glim as a whole with the fashion industry. But with that, if you can kind of get your finger on the pulse of the change and what's happening, I think for the newer brands, there's opportunity, because a lot of these traditional brands are hurting because they didn't change fast enough with the times. So if you get in there while things are changing and just make sure you keep up with what's happening in the industry, reading all the industry reports, reading the industry publications. It's tough when you're new, though, when you're starting out and you're wearing a million hats and you're the designer and you're the, but I think there is, because things are changing, and if you get in at the, kind of at the beginning of this shift, you can really grow with it, if that makes sense. I don't know if I stated that well, but
no, it does. And you hear a lot of people, like you said, you see a lot of these big headlines, and it can feel very just depressing and discouraging. And I personally, from my audience, hear a lot of, oh my gosh, the industry is shrinking and dying, and a lot of fear and panic. But at the same time, if you really step back, people still have to wear clothes. People still have to buy clothes. And so if they're not buying them, like you said, from these department stores, from these big box stores, where are they buying them from, and getting a pulse on that? And like you said, these little boutiques that offer these shopping experiences, or these unique designers that are providing something that there's not 30 of the same white blouse on the rack. There is opportunity, and from what I've heard from various other people in the industry, that the startup and indie designers are thriving more now than they were 5 years ago. There's more opportunity for them to make it, which is amazing to hear. Really inspiring.
Exactly. And, it kind of goes back to the whole online thing, so everything is going online. And if you know how to market yourself, and you can create a fantastic campaign for your brand, and how to, navigate social media and get to the right consumers, we see so many people who are doing extremely well selling direct to the consumer. You have much higher margins that way too, if you're not selling wholesale, and you can reach, the right market online. It's all about, social media marketing. There's so much opportunity to reach people. It's amazing.
Yeah.
We had one brand that we were working with that was designing a yoga pant, which we know there's a million, new lines of yoga wear out there, and athleisure. But she had something unique. She was a graphic artist, and she would sublimate her original artwork on these yoga pants. And she happened to she was very well connected within the LA yoga community. And through her Instagram, getting the right people to repost and getting celebrities to wear, she just had this whole niche she knew how to navigate social media and how to grow her following. And, the bottom line is she had a Kickstarter campaign that raised $98,000,
wow.
which is that's really amazing for an apparel brand. You see this with like tech, really innovative types of products, but for fashion, you don't see that as much. So, there is opportunity out there, and I think there's a lot of opportunity online. It's just knowing how to navigate it, knowing how to get the right followers. And there's a lot of, I think Amazon now is also creating little, stores for these indie designers where there's opportunity. I know it seems like Amazon's taken over the world, but there's also opportunity within Amazon to get your stuff launched out there.
Yeah.
There's a very interesting, not to go off topic too much, but there's this interesting company up in the Bay Area, San Francisco area, called Beta Brand. I don't know if are you familiar with them?
I am familiar with Beta Brand.
I think it's kind of cool what they're doing as well, helping people to launch like one design. You submit a sketch or a prototype and they get the, people to vote on it and they get enough following, they'll produce it and then they'll sell it and you get a cut of that. And it's, I know the tough thing for people is you do give up the rights to that particular product, but at the same time, if you're having trouble getting exposure, it's a way to really it's kind of a launch pad for some brands too, I think.
Yeah.
So
and
just a lot of
go ahead.
Innovative opportunities out there. Oh, no, that's okay. I was just saying a lot of different, opportunities out there through online different platforms.
Yeah. No, and that's a great tip and great direction for a lot of people to go with something like Beta Brand. There's also 19th Amendment, which operates in a similar fashion. I don't know the nitty-gritty details of like how each of those is different, but it's a similar type of concept where you put together your design, whether that be in like a sketch or sample format, and then you put it out to their audience and they vote, and then it can go into production and you work together with them to facilitate the whole process. So it can be a great sort of plug and play way to get started, to get your feet wet without kind of diving into the pool head first, not even knowing how deep it is, and you're all by yourself trying to figure out how to swim.
Exactly. That's a good analogy.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Okay. So a couple things I want to ask you about. One, you mentioned earlier sort of keeping up in some of the industry news and keeping a pulse on what's going on in the industry. Do you have any like daily publications that you read, or I think it can get so over. I know my inbox is full of newsletters, and I'm like, sometimes I feel like I can't even open all of them from Business of Fashion or Racked, or like trying to keep up with what's going on. What's kind of your one-stop shop for keeping a pulse on the industry?
Absolutely. My go-to is the apparel news, the California apparel news, which is not just California. They've been around for 70-some years, and it is, it's circulated actually globally. They really give you up-to-date information. So if I have the same problem. I open my inbox and it's like, oh my God, I don't have time to open all these. I'd love to, but the apparel news is my go-to. And you're going to, they're going to give you current information on what's going on in the industry, what's happening with, retail, what's happening at different levels. And just, I think they've always been a very trustworthy publication.
That's great. And I'll link to that in the show notes for everybody. And then completely off topic from that, but something you mentioned a minute ago, and when you were talking about that gal that did the yoga legging that was super successful, and you mentioned she does the sublimation printing. So at the DG Expo, you said there's fabric suppliers and trim suppliers. Are there any suppliers who do custom development, whether that's around printing or custom developing various trims, or is it pretty much in stock, what you see is what you get?
No, we do have service providers as well.
Okay.
So we've had sublimation companies, print companies. We have a few companies that do like full package product development, especially geared towards startups. So say you're new and it's overwhelming because you need to find a pattern maker, you need to find a sample maker, you're trying to source your product, your fabrics and your trims. So there are companies that go to all of our shows who will help you with that. They'll help to launch you. Even, there are a few of them who will even help you if you have a concept in your head, but you're not an artist and you can't do the sketches and you need someone to help translate that. They can help you from the very beginning stages. So, and then once you get to a certain point, they'll help get you into production. And then once you grow, you kind of, you kind of branch out on your own. But definitely, we do offer various service providers in those areas who will help you get started.
That's awesome. That's awesome. And then outside of some of the custom development, is most of the product that's available in stock and stocked sort of regularly? So the fabric and the trim suppliers, if I buy something right now, and let's say I just need a few yards for sampling, and then in 3 months I'm ready to do production, I can go back and I know I can get all those fabrics and trims. Is that something you see these suppliers doing a pretty good job at?
Normally, yes. Yeah, I can't speak for each one individually, but yeah. You know, there are some, I mean, you can get, when you're sourcing fabrics, they're what we call jobbers who, you know, you can get really fantastic deals if you're going to do like one line, you find a great fabric, you get, you know, really great price on the yardage. When you're going through a jobber, you know, you're never going to be guaranteed you're going to get that same fabric again. Mm-hmm. But it's great for someone who doesn't want to, you know, isn't worried about doing the repeats on that particular fabric. Mm-hmm. Maybe you find a great silhouette and you can move on to something else. So, but yeah, most of our suppliers, you know, like I said, because they're in North America too, there's a shorter turnaround time if you do order from them. But a lot of them will have immediate that you can get at the show. Not all of them, but some of them do offer that.
Yeah, that's great. That's really great. So exciting to have you guys as this amazing resource in the industry. I mean, one of the probably most common questions I get asked as far as startup designers go is, how do I even start finding fabric or trims? Like, they don't even know where to start looking. So, you know, like you said, maybe just look at the show and do some research and pack up a bag and go to the show and walk around and explore and see what's out there and start making some contacts and getting your feet wet in terms of what options you have to create your design.
Absolutely. I mean, that's what's so great about the DG Expo is that it's so easy for people. You can actually, you know, take the time and sit down and talk. You could, if you wanted to spend the whole 2 days, you could probably talk to every exhibitor. And you can't do that at some of these other shows, like the entire, you know, Las Vegas Convention Center full of full of exhibitors. But, you know, it's definitely, and even before I worked with Susan, you know, with the DG Expo, I've been going to her shows since the beginning. And, you know, and I just see how happy people are to have found something so easy to, you know, to source that. And, you know, between the startups I worked with at FBI and just being at the shows and doing seminars there and talking to people, it really has, you know, Susan's really grown a great thing here with this show, and I'm very excited to be joining her team. Yeah. But, you know, one thing I wanted to mention, too, to your point about sourcing is she has also created a guide that you can purchase online or you can buy them at the shows. It's called the Sourcer's Guide, and it is absolutely fantastic for people who are trying to source not only fabrics and trims, but, you know, different, you know, sewing production facilities. Again, all North American companies listed in here, but it's called the Sourcer's Guide.
That's great.
And you can find it on aboutsources.com is the website. But, you know, it's, and I'm not just saying this to sell it because I work with Susan, but when I was with FBI, I had this guide on my desk next to me at all times because I would get calls from members on a daily basis saying, I'm looking for this type of button or this type of fabric, or can you help me find, you know, something. I'm in the Carolinas and I'm looking for a production facility. And I would rely on this book constantly to find, because it has very thorough descriptions of exactly what it'll list each company, you know, and exactly what they'll do. So if it's a production facility, they'll list every type of product they will produce for you. If it's a fabric company, they'll list all the different types of fabrics they offer and so forth. So it's very detailed guide. So especially for someone who's new, I think it's a really great thing to have, because then you could just, you know, at your own time browse through it, and has a lot of great contacts in it.
That's fantastic. And I'll definitely put a link directly to that. I'm looking at it right now. It looks like a phenomenal book. You know, some of those things are just priceless to have that as one-stop shop, and you know it's all curated and it's filtered and it's organized, versus how much time you can spend digging through Google can just be insanely overwhelming. So thank you.
Yeah, and as we know, in this industry, people are a little closed-lipped about things, and a lot of these companies don't even have websites, you know, so it's like, it's really hard. It's like looking for a needle in a haystack. So to have a comprehensive guide like that, you know, it's really a cool thing to have. And just a side note too, now that I'm with Susan and I'm looking at redeveloping our website, because I know that they could use a little bit of a refresher. So it's the next project on the agenda.
The to-do list is always long.
Yeah. But, she's done so much on her own since she started the show, and I think it's absolutely amazing how she's grown it and how, it's become such a successful sourcing event.
Yeah, that's fantastic. Okay, so quick question of something I thought about that you mentioned earlier, just quickly. You mentioned the show's B2B. So as a designer, maybe I just have like an initial concept and some sketches and I'm still starting out. So what do I need to be prepared with to be able to get into the show? Do I need an EIN or an LLC, or what do I need as far as like to present myself as a business and actually get access to the show?
Not necessarily. So you can sign up. It's a very easy online sign up. We don't require any particular, you don't have to have an EIN number or anything.
Oh, okay.
You can register for the show. We invite students to come too because it's a good experience for them. But where it's going to come into play is not getting into the show, but is, when you're dealing with these wholesalers, they want to make sure that that you're not just a home sewer who's making a dress for your, children so that's where you may need it. Now, some of them may be willing to work with you on that level too, but it's really about, these are wholesale companies and it is a business to business trade show, but we're very lenient about coming in and checking out the show because we know a lot of startups. Some people are they need to kind of scope out the industry before they even dive in.
Yeah.
So we welcome people to the show. We don't have a lot of restrictions on attending at all. It's just a matter of you might need that, it depends on the exhibitors the vendors that you're dealing with. They might require that once you start to place orders. Okay.
Well, that's good to know, though, because I know getting into some trade shows can be really tough. So good to know there's not a lot of red tape. And is the show free to attend or is there a fee?
It is. It's absolutely free to attend.
Okay.
You can sign up. We have all of our upcoming shows are now open for registration online.
Okay.
So we have San Francisco, November 19th and 20th. We have Chicago, December 6th and 7th. New York City is January 17th and 18th. Miami is March 27th and 28th. And Dallas is April 25th and 26th. So
that's great.
All registration is open. Now, there is a small fee for most of the seminars we do.
Okay.
But the show is free to attend. Sometimes we do free seminars as well, but we keep the cost very low. The average seminar price is usually $15, and we get some really, really valuable information. So it's worth every penny.
Okay, yeah, that's very low.
We welcome people, even if you're looking to launch a brand and you're doing your market research and trying to figure out what's happening out there. That's why we don't really put strict regulations on it. We want people to be able to come and check it out. And of course, the vendors, they want to talk to people who are serious about, buying but it's definitely, especially with the seminar series, we welcome people to come and educate themselves and, get that great information.
Yeah, that's awesome. Well, Trish, I would like to end with the one question I ask everybody at the end of the show, and that is, what is the one thing that nobody ever asks you about working in the fashion industry, but you wish they did?
Well, one thing, it's kind of funny. This might not answer your question, but the thing I always get, people assume I'm a designer. I'm not a designer. I've never designed a line. Now, I do have a degree in apparel merchandising and management. I studied the business end of it. I've worked in wholesale sales, and I worked in production, and then, of course, with FBI. But it's funny. It's like the minute people think, oh, you work in fashion, they'll say, oh, did you design that dress you're wearing? And I get this all the time. And it's like, no, well, there's more than just designers in the industry. It's an entire business, But I think, I don't know, but I can't, off the top of my head, I can't think of a question that I wish was asked, but I think a lot of people have that misconception of the industry, that it's all glamorous and it's all, and there's a lot of hard work behind the scenes, and it's not all glamour. The fashion shows might look glamorous, but if you've ever produced a fashion show, it's a little bit of a stressful nightmare behind the scenes. But I think, I don't know, that might take a little thought about a particular question, maybe just saying, hey, what's it really like? Is it really, I don't know, gosh.
No, that's a great answer. I think you've done a great job. And actually what you said that I really loved was, everybody just assumes you're a designer. And I think it can be really easy to look at the fashion industry through a very narrow lens of it's all designers. And I think this is a great point to make, not just for people who happen to not work in the industry and ask questions about the industry, but people who want to get into the industry. And I think even they can have, and not to, put them in the corner and just say, oh, you don't know any better. But like, it's very easy when you're wanting to break into the industry to look at it and think, oh, the only option is to be a designer. But there's so many other things you can do. I mean, what you said your degree was in, and the experience that you've had, an insane amount. You're still working in fashion. It's fun. You're getting to do, maybe what always was your dream was to work in fashion, but you're not designing. So there's all these other opportunities and these roles and these jobs to work in the industry without necessarily being a designer.
Absolutely. And you hit the nail on the head. I was just thinking now after you said that, I've done a lot of speaking at colleges, at design schools, and, had colleges come on field trips to FBI and to the California Market Center. And that's the thing I'd say, what are you all looking to do when you graduate? And the majority of them, I want to be a designer. I want to start my own line. Mm-hmm. And it's like, do you realize there are so many other, job opportunities out there?
Yeah.
And it's really a matter of educating people on, you can make great money as a sales rep. Pattern makers actually make a heck of a lot more money than designers, yes, because there's so many people wanting to get into design, and, assistant design positions, which is where you're going to start. You're not going to, launch to the head of the line, but, they're not very great paying jobs, but, pattern makers are in demand. And I always tell people, explore these options.
Yeah.
Open your mind to what's out there, because it's a huge industry. And like you said earlier, Heidi, we all need clothes. This industry is never going to go away.
Yeah.
There might be a shift in the way consumers are shopping and so forth, but there's always going to be a fashion industry. And there are so many parts to this business, that, it goes way beyond. Actually, design is a small component of it when you think about it. Mm-hmm. You could be a beautiful designer. You could make gorgeous clothes. You could have a great eye for designing. But if you don't know how to sell it, how to turn it into a business, how to cost it properly, if you can't do all that, then really it is just a hobby. I always tell students, especially, educate yourself on every part of it. If you're doing an internship, don't just close your mind to like, well, I want to be a designer, so I only want to get an internship in design. Learn every aspect of how this industry operates, because it's going to make you stronger, whether you're launching your own brand or whether you want to just move up the ladder with a big company. The more you know about every component, the more successful you're going to be. So you can't just know one little piece of it and expect to succeed. You've got to know the whole supply chain, the whole gamut of this business, and it's very exciting. It's a little complex, there's a lot of components to it, but lots of opportunity as well.
Yeah, that's fantastic. Not to overwhelm everybody, but there is a lot going on, and you learn it slowly over the years. You kind of never stop learning,
Absolutely.
Which is one of the fun things about working in this industry.
Absolutely.
So, awesome, Trish. Well, thank you so much for that. Where can everybody find you guys online?
Okay, so the DG Expo website is dgexpo.net. That's D for designers and G for guide, which is where the name originated. There was a designer's guide that Susan came out with before the trade shows began.
That's great.
So dgexpo.net. The book I mentioned is aboutsources.com. Please follow us on social media. Instagram and Twitter is at DG Expo. And you can find us on Facebook as well. And DG Expo is, we're out there, and I'm really excited to see all of you at the shows.
Awesome.
We've got five cities to choose from, and it's pretty exciting time right now.
Yeah, that's great. And I will, again, put links to all of that in the show notes and everything you referenced throughout the chat for everybody to click through and discover what you guys are doing. Thank you so much for chatting with me today, Trish. It was really fun to learn about all of this and appreciate all of the advice and inspiration you have to offer everybody out there working on their collections.
Thank you so much, Heidi. It was my pleasure, and I really enjoyed talking to you today. Thank you.
If you'd like to learn more about any of the resources mentioned in this episode, visit the show notes at sfdnetwork.com/25. And since you made it this far, you must have liked the episode. Did you know that one of the greatest ways you can say thank you and help spread the word is by sharing this podcast with others who are working in the industry or who are trying to break into the industry? If you could do me a favor and share the podcast with 3 people that you know, it would mean so much to me. I get tons of amazing feedback from you guys and how much you love the show. You tell me all the time. So I want more people to be able to gain insights and gain real-world advice about working in the industry. And the best way we can do that is by you guys sharing the podcast. So if you can do me a favor, take 60 seconds and email 3 friends who you know would love the podcast, I would be so grateful. Thanks so much, you guys. I really appreciate your help and continued support.